All right. Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much to our families and our staff for being here. My name is Susan Toth, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer here at KIPP DC, and I'm so glad and grateful to welcome you to this session. As parents and caregivers and guardians, you entrust your children and youth to our care. We take that trust very seriously, and we're so honored that you share your trust with us. We want you to know that we understand that our first job is keeping your children safe every single day that they are in our care. And today's conversation is about partnering with you to help keep our students safe when they're with us and even when they're not. We know that child abuse is unfortunately far too prevalent in our society. In the United States, a report of child abuse is made every 10 seconds. We know that the consequences of abuse can be devastating on our children in the immediate sense and in the long term. We know that individuals who have been abused are at a greater risk for a number of negative long-term effects, from substance abuse disorders, physical and mental health challenges, low self-esteem, and increased likelihood of mistreating their own children or family. But we also know that sessions like the one we're doing tonight can help, and the lessons we teach our children can be preventative and empowering for our children. And we know that you are our most important partner in helping keep kids safe. Today, we'll share some of the best practices in abuse prevention that we've learned, and we'll preview the lessons we'll be providing to our students so that they can recognize potentially abusive behavior and know how to respond. As we get started, I want to be sure that you all know that we'll be leaving time for questions at the end of our session. You're also more than welcome to add your questions to the chat, and we'll try to answer your questions in the chat as we go. We're also recording the session to make it available to families who wish to see it later, or to all of you later. Again, we thank you so very much for entrusting your children to us and for being here this evening for this conversation. We look forward to partnering with you and your children over your children's time at KIPP DC to keep your kids safe and well. I'm now going to hand this off to three of my wonderful colleagues, Ms. Erin Pitts, Ms. Chandrika Rennell, and Ms. Melissa Wade. I am so grateful to them and to several other leaders, including Ms. Michelle Behrens and Ms. Bakia Love, for their work in preparing this and in their work in keeping our children safe. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Susan. My name is Erin Pitts. I am the Senior Director of Employee Policy, where I do employee relations work for KIPP DC. That includes, in the unfortunate event that a staff member is accused of misconduct, investigating that. I was a teacher before coming to KIPP, a labor and employment lawyer after that, and I ran DC Public Schools Labor and Employment Office. I am also trained as a Title IX administrator, which means I am certified to do investigations of sexual misconduct. And I'm really pleased to be here tonight to present some of this important information.
Hello. My name is Chandrika Rennell. I go by Sean among staff members. I have been with KIPP for about 2 years. June makes 2 years. I would call myself a social worker turned lawyer. Prior to coming to KIPP and before I was even a lawyer, I practiced primarily with child abuse and neglect, providing in-home services to families who were at risk of having their children removed, as well as with juveniles on parole, domestic violence victims and substance abusers. And then after that, I then transitioned to working with domestic violence law and prosecuting child abuse and neglect matters. And like Erin, I am also a Title IX administrator. I am actually the Director of Student Policy and Title IX coordinator with KIPP DC. So whenever students have issues relating to harassment, dating violence, or stalking, I am one of the points of contacts for that. Very happy to be here today. I currently still work part-time for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network on their call center for victims of sexual assault on the military side. So this is definitely a very important topic for me, and so glad that you guys are able to be with us today.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Melissa Wade. I'm the Managing Director of Mental Health for KIPP DC,
and I have the pleasure of leading our large, vast team of mental health practitioners. Some of you may have worked with them in your child's school. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker in DC. I started at KIPP DC 7 years ago, so this is my 7th year. I worked in the high school as a dean of students with freshmen and sophomores. I spent quite a bit of time in Chicago as a social worker, working on the South Side, working with lots of students who have experienced some of the issues that you're going to learn more about tonight. And also just my therapeutic training is in solution-focused brief therapy, as well as cognitive behavior therapy. So glad to be here. I'm glad to be able to interact with you guys. I don't have a lot of opportunities to do that. So welcome, and I'm excited for the evening.
Okay, so next we're going to go over our agenda really quickly. You guys can see that it's going to be a good amount of very robust and important topics. And with that, I do want to say that these are really sensitive matters. So if you need to step away for a little bit, like we said, it's recorded, so you can come back and listen to the content when you are ready. So in terms of logistics, given the sensitive nature of this content, we have disabled the camera and the audio feature, just so that you guys are able to take the information in without for any concern of anything else going on, anyone seeing in your home and such. And then also, we've also disabled the chat, but you are able to message and ask questions to the panelists. We have Ms. Behrens over there manning that for us. So please, if you have questions, please be sure to hit the Q&A down there, and you be able to have to ask us some questions.
Okay, we're going to start at recognizing signs of child abuse and neglect. And we think this is a really important place to start. I want to go back just one moment. We think it's a really important place to start because we want to make sure as parents, as neighbors, bystanders, whatever role you may play in a moment, that you're able to recognize if a child looks like they're in danger. So we're going to go through some of the material we received from Child and Family Services Administration. We've adapted some of that information. We're going to make sure we provide what we understand to be the best information about the signs and warning signs of, again, abuse and neglect. So then you as parents, when you're handing over your children to other caregivers, can be paying attention to those kinds of signs. And also in your role as a community member, if you see a child who looks to be in crisis, you'll be better equipped to recognize that. So we'll start with neglect. Okay, this is the most common form of abuse, and that is that a child maltreatment that is reported. Over 60% of cases that are reported nationally are cases of neglect. So neglect is really defined as the failure to provide needed and age-appropriate care for a child, even though one is financially able to do so. So we really want to distinguish this from someone who's struggling financially and wants to provide that warm coat, but is having difficulty being able to provide that. This is really about having the resources and still not providing the care, or being provided the resources and still not being provided the care, and still not providing the care. So the examples of neglect of basic needs. So this would be a child who's not receiving, let's say, shelter or food or clothing. Educational neglect. Children between 5 and 13 years of age need to be attending school in Washington, D.C. if they're D.C. residents. So it's the failure to allow a child to attend school or withholding important educational services. Medical neglect. This might be you send your child to a daycare provider and you send them with a medication, but the daycare provider is not giving your child that medication. Lack of supervision. We know children under a certain age must be supervised. So same example, you send your child to daycare and you find out the provider is leaving their home and leaving your child unsupervised. So warning signs. If the child appears frequently sleepy or isn't adequately dressed for the weather on a regular basis, appears malnourished. Also some behavioral signs. They may appear withdrawn or fearful, may show some speech, eating, or habit disorders. And when it comes to your child, you know them very well. So you should look for things that appear different. If they're not appearing as themselves, that could be a sign that there's a concern. Okay, so physical abuse. This is less common. We know it as the non-accidental trauma or physical injury caused by using physical force against a child or otherwise physically harming a child. So one normally thinks of things like striking a child, punching a child, using a weapon against a child, things like that, but also asking a child to hold a position for a prolonged period that can cause pain. That also could be an example of abuse. And so certainly we know physical abuse can result in lots of different types of injuries, from bruises to burns to bite marks. And important in DC, while spanking is legal, excessive spanking is not. So spanking that's leaving marks or causing long-term pain, other physical injuries would be a sign of abuse as well, or an example of abuse as well. So some signs of that abuse may be occurring here. A child may become destructive or violent themselves. They may wear excessive clothing so as to hide the marks of their injuries. They may not be able to explain how they were injured, may provide inconsistent explanations when they're asked about how something happened, may become more clingy, don't want to let you go, want to stay really close to mom and dad, difficulty sitting or walking, and a sudden decline in performance. You might see the sudden decline in performance as an example of a warning sign of other forms of abuse as well. Student was performing well, and now they're suddenly struggling. It could be a sign of any of these types of abuse. Okay, sexual abuse. Sexual abuse in DC law is defined rather broadly, but we can think of it in 4 different types of categories. So touching offenses. This is literally someone is touching a child's private parts. This could be touching a child's private parts. Certainly penetrating the anus or vagina would be sexual abuse. Asking a child or making a child touch an adult's private parts would also qualify. And there's a number of non-touching offenses. So things like exposing oneself to a child intentionally, intentionally exposing a child to child pornography, exploiting a child sexually, so engaging a child in prostitution, and even attempts to do any of these things would qualify. So even if the child is solicited for prostitution and doesn't engage in prostitution, that would be an example of sexual abuse. The attempt would be an example of sexual abuse. So again, similarly to other kinds of abuse, you might see the child become withdrawn or aggressive. You might see that they begin to engage in sexual conduct that they never engaged in before, conduct that you would think would not know about given their age. So that might be mimicking behaviors that they've seen or mimicking behaviors that have been acted out upon them. They're complaining of pain in private parts or having toileting accidents. One other thing we would talk about is vague disclosures. Particularly in this area of abuse, children may not be comfortable telling the full story of what happened. So they may drop hints. I didn't like the way someone touched me, or someone's keeping me up at night. And it leaves it to us to sort of figure out and listen very closely for what they may be trying to disclose. Okay, we want to give a note on peer-to-peer abuse. We often think about abuse as something that's happening between an adult and a child, but in the school's context, and truthfully nationally, peer-to-peer abuse is a huge factor. And in the school's context, we see more of this than adult on student abuse. So examples that you might see: a student is posting nude pictures of another classmate online, or they're sending sexual videos of themselves, and the receiver does not want to receive those. They're spreading rumors about sexual encounters. Certainly if they're touching a student on their private parts or smacking a student on the backside, that would be a concern. Sexual gestures. Those are just some examples of how students might interface with, might abuse each other. And again, warning signs are quite similar: inappropriate, age inappropriate sexual behavior, new sexual behavior that you've never seen before, a sudden reluctance to participate. So a student loved football, couldn't wait to get to football practice, and now they suddenly no longer want anything to do with football. Students avoiding other youth. So is there a particular child that they don't want to be around, that they're nervous about, and are they looking for adults to supervise them? Are they trying to stay close to an adult who can protect them potentially from this other student? So with that, I think we can take a quick look at the Q&A. Are there any questions on this point?
No questions at this point.
Okay. I'll turn it over to Ms. Raynell.
Thank you. So now we're going to talk about preventing abuse. We gave you kind of an overview of what abuse looks like. Now we want to say, okay, now that we see what it looks like, What can we do to make sure that we're preventing it from happening? So we want to talk to you first about some strategies that KIPP DC has adopted. All of them except for the last two are things that we've already been doing, have been doing for some time. And it's pretty much background checks, pre-employment background checks. So before staff members start with us, there's background checks that take place. We have some policies around abuse preventions and practices. Ms. Wade will talk about some of that a little bit later. We conduct investigations, as me and Ms. Pitts already discussed. We put in corrective actions and supportive measures. So that is something that's basically like, what can we do to help whoever's involved and make sure that they feel safe and supported in school and that this does not happen again? Those are what corrective and supportive measures will look like. It's not meant to be punitive or anything, but making sure that people feel safe and comfortable coming to school. Mandated reporting, as it is a DC law and federally as well in some places that KIPP DC employees are mandated reporters, and then staff training. Now, new to this is the information and resources for families, which is this portion, as well as some things on the webpage, and then curriculum for students that will be rolling out. So as I said a little bit earlier, the material, this topic is just really sensitive, but we are about to start talking about grooming behavior, and that gets a little bit more in depth. So really, if you need to take a moment, please step away. We completely understand. Make sure you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So the first thing we're gonna do is define grooming. So grooming is a process by which offenders gradually draw victims into a sexual relationship and maintain that relationship in secrecy. This is a definition that we got from a resource called Darkness to Light. It's a sexual abuse prevention nonprofit. So what are we getting from this definition? It's that grooming is a gradual process. It's something that does not happen overnight. It could take months, it could take years to get through the entire grooming process. And essentially it is strong relationship development, and then somewhere it veers off into sexual abuse. And I do have a statistic that I want to share that is very alarming, that 90% of child victims of sexual abuse know their abuser, which is why this is just so important that we know this information so that we can all be allies in keeping kids safe. So we have already gone through defining grooming. Now I wanna break down the process for you a little bit. So grooming may look like a healthy relationship at first, but then it veers off. So the first stage of grooming is rapport building. And that's pretty basic. Here's who I am. This is my name. We're able to recognize each other. We know who each other are. That can be as simple as they attend the same school. It's their teacher. If it's outside of a school context, I said, even if someone saw, oh, I saw my mom talking to this person in the grocery store before, there's just some type of, we know each other. I know who you are. Now in the relationship development phase, at this point, it's like we care about each other. I know you, I know maybe some of your interests, some of your likes, your dislikes, things that you worry about. Now we're having a little bit more of conversation, that it's not just like in passing, we're stopping and we're talking, we know a little bit about each other. Now in the testing phase, this is where we start to depart from a healthy relationship to a grooming relationship. And at this stage, the perpetrator is testing the boundaries with the victim. How far can they push the victim? What can they get away with? What will the victim like not tell anybody about? And it can be broken down into 3 categories: physical, emotional, and behavioral. So in terms of the physical aspect, something as simple as tickling or wrestling could be grooming behavior. Because again, how far can I go? How much are you going to allow me to touch you? Or where can I touch you before you maybe say no, stop, or tell someone? And then next is emotional. Emotional is asking questions that are maybe too personal, trying to spend too much time to build that relationship up. And when I say like emotional questions, not like, oh, what's your favorite assignment? It could be something that's maybe sexual, or that's just inappropriate for young kids to be talking about. And then in terms of behavioral, it's getting the child to break rules. And this could be like staying out past curfew, calling or texting when they're not supposed to be, maybe late at night, or maybe they're grounded or something and they're sneaking their phone, or possibly meeting up with the adult without telling others. Seeing again, how far can I push you? What can I do? And then based on that and how far they believe they're able to go, next is the specialness and exclusivity page. In this stage of the process, now there's gifts, secrets, inside jokes, and the people involved become more essential in each other's lives. You may hear phrases like, no one matters to me like you do. Or the perpetrator may say to the child, you're my best friend, you're my favorite, you're so mature for your age. I can't talk to anyone else like this. These are things that are establishing that you're special, you're unique, like bigging them up to build up the relationship. This is just this special bond between us. Once that's established, then the sexual abuse can occur, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the last stage is minimizing the disclosure. So remember, in this grooming process, I said that it's a long process. It can take time. The parent may know the person, the teacher, they may be known. The point I'm trying to make is that a trusting relationship has been built at this point, and this victim trusts the perpetrator and has established some loyalty with the perpetrator, and they may not want to betray the perpetrator, therefore minimizing the disclosure. There's also the aspect that the perpetrator may say something like, what? This was your idea. You were texting me so late. You were throwing yourself at me. You know your parents didn't want you to do that. This is your fault. Statements like that, again, minimizing the disclosure. And then also the biggest point is that this is probably really, really, really confusing for the child. They may be confused about what happened, the outcome, the aftermath, what's going to happen. And with that, again, further minimizing the disclosure. So those are the phases of the grooming relationship. So we did want to do a little bit of a distinction between grooming and a healthy relationship. So like, where do they separate at? Because you're saying that they diverge, all of this. So what does a healthy relationship with an adult and a child look like? The adult will be a role model. There'll be clear boundaries. They'll involve others in the relationship, because remember we said secrets and gifts. If there's others involved, then it's open, it's observable. Encouraged independence and emotionally consistent. In terms of emotionally consistent, remember I said they're best friends, best buds. The same way that relationship is, are you acting that same way in front of parents, in front of other adults, in front of other friends? It may be a little bit emotionally inconsistent that you're being treated different depending on who's there when it's happening. In terms of a grooming relationship, the perpetrator will act like a peer. Remember, they're their best friend. I've never talked to anyone the way that I talk to you. They seek to isolate, to individualize, like we said. They have these special relationships. It encourages dependency on each other, and it's volatile. So those are the distinctions between a healthy relationship and a grooming relationship. So the difficulty comes in the overlap. And that's why it's so important that we set clear boundaries. So some of the overlap will be the shared features of a healthy relationship and a grooming relationship. And the shared features come down to accessibility, long-term relationship, building trust, and physical contact. But the thing is that what is the person, the perpetrator will say, doing with the accessibility? Is it the degree of accessibility and how they're accessing the child? So there could be, oh, we're texting and we're talking about school, but it's 2 a.m, like a time that's just not appropriate to be having. And so while part of it may be appropriate, that accessibility is what's creating the open door. And even with physical contact, it could be healthy, but it can also be grooming. So, we define and say, it's okay to do like a pat on the back, but kissing may not be okay. A massage on the back may not be okay. So I just want to make sure that you're clear that grooming and healthy relationships, they can be really hard to distinguish. That is 100% true because of these shared features. But that's why it's important that we define these and that we keep and set boundaries to make it easier to distinguish when we see that there is a boundary violation. Okay, so let's talk about boundaries with students. So I talked a little bit about some of the training that we've done, some of the policies that we have rolled out, and this is really pulled from a lot of the training that we do with KIPP DC staff. We reinforce appropriate boundaries as much as possible, and we break it down into 4 categories: safe touch, safe talk, safe spaces, and no secrets. So in terms of safe touch, during COVID, essentially there is no touching. But even outside of of COVID, we train our staff that we do not push or pull students, and only trained staff members will restrain a student, but only when necessary for other safety. But even outside of COVID with our staff, we won't tell staff members to kiss students. We don't encourage staff members to engage in long hugs, but they can expect high fives, a fist pump, or elbow taps now with the pandemic. And then in terms of safe talk, communication with students where the content is appropriate in time, manner, and is observable. So like we said, it can be appropriate content, but is it at the right time? And is it observable? We advise staff to not use personal social media or email accounts with students. And when we say observable, especially with talk as well, is that, you can't see words, but someone should know that the conversation's happening, that it's occurring. So it's not a secret to anyone. In terms of space, we encourage safe spaces. And with this, we advise staff to meet with students in rooms with windows or the doors open, again, so they are observable. We don't pull students into isolated spaces for conversations. We don't transport students in our personal cars, because again, that's still now, it's less observable, it's one-on-one, and we never have students come to our homes. And then the last one in terms of secrets, there's no secrets. We don't give gifts in secrets. We don't tell students to keep secrets. And anytime that someone's aware of this, they are to notify staff of these unusual, leaders of these unusual interactions. So again, we talked about the importance of boundaries, and these are boundaries that we've set within the school staff, but also you guys can relay to your children about even just in the public and with others. And, while we are and our staff members may be very well-intentioned, and the important well-intentioned, the next person may not be. So we can be inadvertently priming a child to be more vulnerable to abuse. So they accept those behaviors with us, and then they could possibly expect the behaviors with someone else who is not as well-intentioned. So that's why boundaries are so, so, so important in making them clear. So additionally, in terms of safety at school, we pay attention to all students that are in our care, regardless of their age. Even something like a hall pass is so that we know you're supposed to be in the hallway, the teacher knows that you're gone. And it's also essential in preventing students from maybe injuring themselves or others. As long as they're being supervised, we can intervene quickly or prevent it from happening. And then when Ms. Pitts spoke earlier about peer-to-peer abuse, supervision is so important for that, to be able to observe those things and do something about it in the moment. I've referenced mandated reporting a couple of times. KIPP DC employees are all required by law to report any potential signs of abuse and neglect. We take this obligation very, very, very seriously because we want to make sure that we keep our kids safe. And we encourage you to report as well if you have any suspicion that there is abuse or neglect. I do want to note that with CFSA, if you want to make an anonymous report, you absolutely can. If the concern is like, oh, someone's going to know, reports can be anonymous. So you can take advantage of that. So now we're going to talk about responding to disclosures and reporting abuse. Well, let me say, is there any questions that we have in the chat, Michelle?
No questions at this time.
Okay, great, thank you. We just pounded you with a lot of information about abuse, neglect, about grooming, and it's like, okay, information overload, but also, what do I do when someone approaches me with this? And I do want to say, I keep saying child, child, child. These tips can really help with adults as well. So in responding to disclosures, we have a couple of tips, 6. This is not an all-inclusive list, but we think that these are some of the really big takeaways that you would want to use when you are confronted with a disclosure. So the first is listen and stay calm. And I essentially say, like, kind of accept the disclosure as language that I would use. Basically, like, don't pry, don't poke, don't pry, don't go, just listen and stay calm. I know that the information that you may be hearing is shocking or horrifying, but if the reaction is not what's expected or it's too much, the child or the person may shut down, because this is a very, very scary thing to do, to come forward and say that someone's hurting them. So, listen and stay calm, even though you want to go into like mode, let me help, let me help, let me help. Just take it all in, take a deep breath and listen. Next is thank the child. Thank the child for sharing. This may have been one of the hardest things that they'll ever do. Let them know, thank you for being so brave for coming to me. Thank you for trusting me with this information. It's important for them to know that they're supported in what's happening and what's going forward. The next is don't express dismay, doubt, judgment, or shame. So again, I'm saying you're in mode, oh my God, I got all of this information. I have to know, I have to know. Stay calm and listen. Stay calm and listen. Because if you express, and how does this, if you express this, like I said, it may get the person to draw back. They may think they did something wrong. And how does this come across? Verbals, nonverbals, but also sometimes in the course of how questions come through. That person would never hurt you like that. How could that happen? You weren't there. Like whatever it is that may come out. So we just want to avoid trying to express any big emotions, doubt, judgment, shame, dismay, anything like that. Do not interrogate. This is a specific request that CFSA has made and advised us of, that when you receive a disclosure, do not interrogate the person. Avoid leading questions. And that's basically a question that would provide a possible answer. So let's say a child, unfortunately and fortunately, in the jobs that I've had, I have been confronted with disclosures. And in the moment, the child said, you know, such and such hurt me. If my next statement is, did they hit you? Did they grab you? They touched you here? That's all leading. It's telling the child what happened instead of just listening and staying calm. Avoid asking to repeat the story. This is still under do not interrogate. You know, this is a very stressful and sensitive moment for the child, and having to retell the story can be re-traumatizing. So avoid asking to retell the story. And asking a lot of questions or anything of the sort. There are trained professionals at CFSA or other childcare agencies who are trained on how to handle this. The biggest one that I will say here is the next one. Tell your child the abuse is not their fault. Victims of abuse, and I'm not just talking about sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence, any type of abuse, a lot of times victims believe it to be their fault. So the biggest thing that someone can hear when faced with these situations is, this isn't your fault. I want you to know this isn't your fault. I'm so sorry that this happened to you. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't deserve for this to happen. It's something called self-blame, or the coulda, shoulda, wouldas is what I say when I'm working the hotline. Well, if I didn't go to the house, this wouldn't have happened. If I would have said something sooner, this wouldn't have happened. The person tends to believe that they did something to cause this thing to happen to them. And it may not seem rational to some, but it's something that a lot of victims experience. And then last, report the abuse and seek help. Ms. Wade will talk about some resources out there. I know that these are tricky topics and hard to deal with, and you may not know. It's okay to not know. That's why there's resources out there to help you out and figure out what's the next best step. Okay, so in adding on to responding to disclosures, again, this is from CFSA and other child abuse prevention experts in terms of suggested questions and then questions to avoid. So with the suggested questions, we're basically saying don't use leading questions because they plant ideas. It could affect memory. It could be traumatizing if authorities get involved. I keep saying CFSA, MPD, it doesn't mean it's automatically going to happen. But if they do get involved, it can become traumatizing because now you've asked questions, the cousins ask questions, they're asking questions, and then also it can impede their investigation through the leading questions. So what are neutral, open-ended questions? These are the 5 questions that CFSA would like for anyone who's receiving a disclosure to ask. What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Who did it, and how do you know them? And then leading questions, like I said, did this person touch you? Did this person hit you? And then the implying fault questions. Why didn't you tell me before? What were you doing over there? What did you do to make this happen? All implying fault. So I keep giving the example of the kid coming up to me and saying, you know, such and such hurt me. And then you say, well, what do I say next? Well, what happened? Well, we were on the playground and this, and this. When was it? Where? There was no why in there. Why didn't you do this? Just those 5 questions will get you the information that you need to hopefully seek help and get to the next steps. So in terms of reporting abuse at the school, abuse can be reported to teachers, school leaders, mental health practitioners, or me, the Title IX coordinator. Specifically, sexual harassment, dating violence, and stalking can be reported to a school leader. And again, me, the Title IX coordinator. And of course, you can report any concerns of child abuse and neglect to CFSA or MPD. Their number is here, 202-671-SAFE.
All right, thank you, Sean. I always learn so much whenever you talk about this stuff. I can tell the passion in your voice. And so, as she said, like there's a lot of information here. You're probably thinking about a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different things that may have happened. And we're here to offer you lots of resources, both within our network at your child's school, and then also in the larger national and DC community, to help you recognize and report abuse that you may know of. So we'll start first with school resources. So as I said before, I'm the managing director of mental health. So I work with all of the mental health practitioners, as well as the community-based clinicians in your child's school. And we have a website. We have a webpage on the KIPP DC website that yep, there it is right there. that you can go to one, be able to like get more information on how to know if your child needs mental health support in the general sense, but also it provides links at the bottom there for you to be able to contact the mental health team at your school. So find your school on there, click on the referral form, and you'll be able to type in a little note. It's only going to be seen by the eyes of mental health professionals that work at your child's school, and they'll be able to get in contact with you immediately to figure out like what your needs are and what kind of support you actually need. So go to the KIPP DC website, get to the mental health webpage, and you'll be able to kind of figure out that referral form depending on your child's school. And also at the bottom of that page, it talks a little bit about the partnerships that we have as an organization with Catholic Charities as a community-based organization, Mary Center, as well as Georgetown Wise. These are partnerships that we've developed over the course of years working in the city. And all of those clinicians are also going to be helpful for you as well. In addition to our mental health practitioners, we also have a list of our KIPP DC abuse prevention policies. So we mentioned earlier in the presentation that we have policies in our student handbooks and staff handbooks. The KIPP DC website also gives you links for those policies as well. Everything from our equal opportunity and non-discrimination in education policy to our student bullying prevention policy, as well as our mandated reporting policy that Sean mentioned, and also policy around harassment. So go to that page on the KIPP DC website so that you can actually read it in its entirety for more information. And moving on to community resources. So there's lots of different resources that you can link up to get just assistance with like, hey, I feel like this is happening. Who do I call? There's a plethora of resources that we're offering you here, as you see. The first one that you see here is the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline. And that's basically offers crisis intervention and referrals to emergency social services and support resources that you may need. There's the DC Access Helpline. So that helpline actually can help you with not only with your child, but also with adult services and a plethora of areas in terms of mental health. And you can also get referrals for immediate mental health or ongoing care. There's a National Sexual Assault Hotline that's run by RAINN.org, and RAINN stands for Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. That hotline, it can route you to your local RAINN Sexual Assault affiliate, and they'll be able to provide confidential short-term support from a trained staff member, referrals for long-term supports in your area, and information about laws in your community and so forth. A lot of some of the stuff that we've already covered in today's presentation. Next resource is the Child and Adolescent Protection Center at Children's National Medical Center, so at Children's Hospital. And they provide highly trained specialists in child physical and sexual abuse. And they see patients for comprehensive exams, forensic exams, and counseling and social work services. Safe Shores, so that's more of the forensic help that we were speaking about, provides forensic interviewing services, family advocacy, therapy services and referrals, and education for the public. And last but not least, this is what Sean was talking about earlier, CFSA. So that's not only the hotline that staff members at KIPP DC need to call when we want to report instances of neglect and abuse, but anyone in the city of DC can call that hotline if they suspect that someone has been abused. So there you have it, lots of different resources for you at your disposal should you have come across any kind of abuse or neglect to a student.
Okay, so now we're going to turn to giving you an overview of what your children will see. We're certainly not going to give them information like what we're providing to you, but are going to give them something that is more age appropriate and grows with them as they stay with us. So we've purchased a program called Play It Safe. We liked it in part because it was approved by the Office of the State Superintendent of Education here in DC for application across all grades. And so we love that we could have a program that would allow continuity. So your children will get introduced to it as pre-K students. And then as they mature, the content matures all the way up to 12th grade. Again, it's age appropriate. The strategies that are suggested are evidence-based in terms of protecting students. And we're going to deliver a subset of the curriculum that Play It Safe has to offer this year. We're not going to do all of them. We've selected the modules that we think are most appropriate for introduction in a virtual space, and also appropriate because this will be the first year we're rolling out the content. So we want to give students a good entry point to the curriculum. So for example, our 6th graders will not see the curriculum that we might normally do for 6th grade. We're going to give them what the 5th graders are seeing, which we think is perfectly appropriate and I guess a better entry point to Play It Safe. Our high school students are all going to get the same content that focuses on sexting and cyberbullying. And we think that is really important content for all of them to receive. And again, a better entry point in a virtual space. The lesson format, this is designed to be delivered in a classroom setting. So you're looking to have people who know your children, they know the kids around them, they know the adults in the room, so that it's a much more familiar and comfortable place to have sensitive conversations. And it's also a smaller group. It's not meant for a large auditorium. So your students will get this, your children will get this curriculum in a classroom sometime between May 3rd and June 4th. And again, it'll be a module that is appropriate to their age. Okay, the content of Play It Safe varies across grade levels, but between pre-K 3 and 12th grade, they will see content about physical abuse, sexual abuse, bullying, harassment, online safety, peer pressure, healthy relationships, sexting, consent. All of these really important, meaty topics will be covered. And again, what we like, it allows for common language. So even as a little pre-K student, they're going to learn about three types of touch. Safe touch, that is touch that makes you feel cared for and loved. It can be a hug, it can be a pat on the back. There's unsafe touch. As adults, we talk about this as physical abuse. So it'll be described to children as things that hurt for a long time. They might leave marks, bruises, things of that nature. And they'll learn about confusing touch. As adults, we talk about sexual abuse. But the language of confusing touch, we think, is just much less threatening. It's something that even a young child can describe. What I experienced didn't hurt, but it made me uncomfortable. Someone touched me on my private parts, or someone asked me to touch them on their private parts. And they did it for no good reason. It wasn't a doctor helping me. It wasn't my parent helping me with bathing. It was something that felt wrong. It felt confusing. So those 3 types of touch are emphasized from, again, pre-K 3 all the way to 12th grade. The safety rule, again, they'll hear it from the very youngest to the oldest, to say no if something unsafe is happening, to get away as quickly as you can if someone's being unsafe with you, and to tell a trusted adult about what happened, and to keep telling until someone believes you and offers to help. Okay, so really just a quick preview of these lessons. I'm going to go through you'll see quick exemplars of all the lessons, and then we're going to flip over to the Play It Safe website and take a look at a couple of videos. So at the earliest age groups, you'll see cartoons. Again, they're going to introduce the safety rule and the 3 types of touch, but it'll be in a very friendly format with cartoon characters. Once you get to elementary, this is one example of a 3rd grade curriculum. In this case, they're learning about internet safety, they're learning about bullying, again, the types of touch, the safety rule, how important it is to tell when something has happened to you, and the fact that it truly is hard, but how you navigate the fact that it's hard and still tell. At the middle school level, this is one example. It's going to get a little bit more mature. So we're seeing content about This module here is all about sexual abuse, internet safety, the types of touch, the safety rule, again, the importance of telling, the challenges of telling. And there's a bystander component here too. There's a young student who is a friend of this child who's going to talk about how they can help their friend. And at the high school level, this is the module we're going to use for all high school students. Again, it's about sexting and cyberbullying, about the fact that once you post pictures online, you can't get that moment back, and also how a bystander can help out in those moments. So we're going to flip over the Play It Safe website to take a look at some of these modules. We encourage you to spend time on this website. It's just playitsafe.org. You can look at all of the trailers. You can preview the scripts that staff will be using with students. There's a parent-facing component to this too, so you could purchase some of these items and share them to your children, share them with your children. So we'll look at the third grade, What would you do? Preview.
Now it's time for another episode of What Would You Do? The show where we think through smart choices in challenging situations with the help of Thaddeus McBrainius Jr., better known as the Baby Professor.
Sometimes we all need a little help, right?
Right, which brings us to our friend Mia.
Hello, I'm Mia.
Look, Professor, Mia's got a problem and she'd like to pick your brain.
Ooh, that sounds painful.
No, it's her situation that's painful.
Well, it seems to me you have two choices. One, you can do nothing.
Which means nobody will know, and therefore can't help you.
Or you can do something.
Which might be scary or hard.
So, what would you do?
Well, if I do nothing, it might happen again. If not to me, then somebody else. So I guess I have to do something.
So you can see really important messages, but hopefully delivered in a really accessible and friendly way for kids. That's what we're going for. And we'll take a quick look at the 9th grade trailer as well. It is the little girl sitting down, just up a little bit more. You'll see this is actually, it's listed as a middle school program, but again, we think it's age appropriate. We think it's a better entry point for some of this content. And then when we're back in person, we will then have our 10th, 11th, and 12th graders who are participating in the program right now see the next level of program, but they would have seen the 9th grade curriculum, and then they'll get the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade curriculum next year.
It all started when Scotty went on vacation for spring break. I didn't want him to go. I told him to keep thinking about me while he was away. And then he kissed me goodbye. And that was pretty magical. That night I kept thinking about him. Couldn't sleep. I wanted him to be thinking about me too. And that's when I made the biggest mistake of my life.
Okay, well, thank you for sitting through a preview with us of the program. But again, you can access all these materials at playitsafe.org. Certainly reach out if you have any questions about what your children can anticipate as we get started with these programs in May.
So first we wanted to check, are there any questions in our Q&A down there, Michelle?
No questions.
All right, great, thank you. So just as a follow-up, where do we take it from here? You guys will be sent some information this evening, I believe, that's gonna give you a breakdown of lessons by grade, because as Ms. Pitts explained, there's like multiple modules, so you'll know what lessons your child will be getting this year. We'll respond to any additional questions that we have. We're gonna circulate this presentation and post a video of this presentation as well. So if you want to go back and watch it, or if you wanted to even show it to another parent, just so you can share this important information that you received. We encourage you to visit playitsafe.org. We think it's a great resource for you to learn more about child abuse prevention. And the students' lessons will occur May 3rd to June 4th. They're going to flow out sometime between that time. The school leader for each specific school will know the date once those are finalized. So we really just want to thank you for coming today, for listening to this information, so we can keep all of our kids safe. We will learn and grow into better advocates for our children, especially with us doing stuff like this and you spending time with us today. We greatly appreciate it.